Welcome to the Fast Draw Live here on CBSNews.com, where Schoolhouse Rocks meets Freakonomics. I'm Cali Carlin, and today we're going to talk about genetic modification, whether it's food, plants, animals. We want your thoughts, and we are joined by the Fast Draw co-creator, Josh Landis. Thanks for being here. Now, we're about to roll your piece. In the meantime, we want your comments and questions while this piece is rolling. You can chat away in the chat box, which is to the right of the video. So here is the Fast Draw take on genetic engineering.
Researchers have genetically engineered monkeys to glow green under a special light. Not only that, when these monkeys have babies, they glow green too.
A lot of people don't like the idea of messing with genes, but the truth is we've been doing it for a long time. Why do you think there are so many different breeds of dogs? People have been controlling their genes through breeding for hundreds of years.
But we're in a brave new world ever since scientists discovered how to isolate and alter specific genes. You have first-hand experience with this. For decades, the food industry has been making stronger, fuller varieties of corn, tomatoes, and other crops. Today, up to 75% of processed foods in stores have genetically modified ingredients, almost impossible to avoid.
And the medical world is getting in on the act. The FDA just approved the first drug produced by genetically engineered animals. It's an anti-clotting drug made from the milk of genetically modified goats. These goats right here.
So now that scientists can alter the DNA in plants and animals, there's little doubt that they'll be able to do it in humans one day. But that'll be too far, right?
What if you had some horrible disease and doctors could fix you by changing your DNA? Well, given our track record, it's hard to imagine that anything could stop genetic engineering now.
Love the piece.
Thanks,
I always love your work. It's so creative. Now,
we get to play with monkeys and crazy things all day long.
You inject, cartoons, animations, the whole mix. Now let's start with these glowing monkeys, and we've also seen the glowing puppies. Why would scientists even want to create the glowing feature in puppies or monkeys?
Halloween. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just saying it's actually a marker for genetic modification, and if you can make a monkey that glows green under this light and then its offspring glows green, you know that the change that you made in the parent has carried through to the successive generations. So in this case, it's the color for an experiment, but in the future it could be a quality that would prevent a disease.
Because we need people to be able to glow too.
We need people, we'll save energy for air traffic controllers maybe, I don't know.
So the other thing that really impressed me, 75% of the food we buy that is processed in a grocery store has genetically modified ingredients.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to avoid these days. That's mostly through corn and soybeans. These are the big crops that have been modified, and primarily to prevent them against pests, because this what they call these mono-agricultural institutions, they rely on single strains, so they're susceptible to pests, so they're always kind of waging this war. But there's a big, a big problem with this technology, and mostly it's that countries overseas don't want to buy these products that have been modified.
We're okay with it in the U.S., but overseas people are not as comfortable with modified food.
Yeah, it's true, and they're a little bit queasy about the idea of changing genes, and the line that they don't like that has been crossed is called transgenic modification, which is you take an organism A and organism B and then combine them. So you'll take a fish organism, insert a tomato gene into the fish, and then you get a nicer color.
Which is why we have that richer colored salmon when the salmon has the oranger colors from tomato.
Exactly. They have done it in a lot of different technologies. They've done it to prevent, for example, a big one is cotton. You take a bacteria, insert it into a cotton gene, and it produces a toxin, so the bugs that would like to eat the cotton now won't eat it because it's toxic. So it's this kind of slippery slope where you're combining genes, and it's in medicine now that's big. A big promise is transgenic medical research, which the most likely thing, and it's really creepy to think about, but it's using human genes in pigs, so they'll grow organs that can then be transplanted into humans.
So that's complete transgendering back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody has had one of those things yet, but I don't know. I personally think that it's probably a matter of time, because if you can offer hearts to people with failing hearts, they may not care if they come from pigs if they're going to stay alive. But of course, obviously there's huge implications with that.
And where do we set the boundary lines? Well, we want to hear from all of you what you think about this. So please, any questions or comments, start chatting in our chat room. Also, how long has this been going on for? How long have we been modifying foods and selling modified foods in grocery stores?
Yeah, well, not very long. I mean, historically, I think the first modified food that you could buy, like go and buy, was a breed of tomato that was back in the 90s. People have been, every time there's a new advance in this field, there's a huge outcry. People saying we don't want this, we don't like this. This is kind of asking for trouble. Because you may get a better quality today, but what happens 10 years down the road when you find out that maybe that kind of tomato isn't so good for you.
And that's the thing, it's going to take time to really see what the ramifications are.
Yeah.
We don't know yet.
Exactly.
But we went from the tomato, just as you said, in '94 to today. There are 50 different products that the FDA has okayed to be sold that are genetically modified foods. And the FDA says that this is safe and that they're confident that genetically modified foods are safe.
They say it's safe, and I guess we believe that until they tell us otherwise. I don't have any information beyond the experts on this. The one thing about genetically modified foods that's also important to note, it's the impact that it can have in the world as a whole, and on food security. There's something, I don't know how many billion people don't get enough food in their diets, and so the idea that you can make crops that have greater yields, that are resistant to drought, could save lives. And in addition to that, this transgenic modification, what also they're doing is they're putting genes into bananas, for example, that can protect people against hepatitis. So, a natural vaccine in a food that you eat, I mean, on the surface, what's not to like about that?
Absolutely. Now, we have some questions in the chat room. One question is, what about the ban on human cloning, or what about the future? What does this mean to humans in the future?
Well, I mean, human cloning is right up there in that category, and it's like kind of one of these Pandora's box. If it's easy to be against it if you're relatively healthy, or and this isn't an issue. But if you're somebody who has a disease, or whose children have a disease that's a hereditary disease or a genetic disorder that could be fixed through this, who would say, no, let's not help my child survive? And so it's a very slippery slope. I mean, there's two kinds of genetic work going on in the medical field involving humans these days. One is just kind of more traditional gene therapy, where they'll take a virus or a bacteria and teach it, basically re-engineer it to go into your body and find a tumor and eat it or disable it. The other kind is called germline research, and that's actually changing your physical DNA structure. So you will be changed, and your children and their children will be changed. And that's, again, another line that people are very uncomfortable with crossing, because once you do that, it's kind of like monkeying with the hardware. I mean, it's
absolutely. And just as you can modify or mutate genes that way, what about foods? A question from the chat room is, what about foods that you eat with mutated genes? Can those affect you?
The research says that those cannot. That the food that you eat, if it's modified with a fish, gene or bacteria or whatever they do to make it nicer, that will pass through your body. You'll digest it, because essentially it's for your purposes of digesting it, it's not really that different. Right. And I also you can also point out is that we share a lot of genes with the food we eat to begin with. I mean, something on the order of 50% of the genes in a banana are genes in us. So
interesting.
And so it's incredible how much genes are alike, but if you change 0.00001% of a gene, you've got a completely different organism. It's really amazing. And so they're starting to understand how complex this is, and how to make little tweaks that can be good. But again, I mean, there's a natural resistance among the public and among a lot of scientists to say, we may fix a short-term problem, we may create a long-term nightmare.
Absolutely, we just don't know yet. I mean, as with any new technology, there's a lot of good and bad that comes with it. Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh Landis. That's so interesting. Sure. And you can all find much more of the Fast Draw, the Fast Draw brilliance, as I like to call it. Yes, all the time. You can find it on cbsnews.com/fastdraw. You can also follow them on Twitter/fastdraw, or you can even download the podcast on iTunes. So lots of options for getting your Fast Draw fix every week, and you have a new episode every Wednesday. And we hope that you will also join us every Wednesday morning live here on cbsnews.com to chat with Josh or Mitch, the co-creators of the Fast Draw. So thanks so much for joining us. We hope to see you again soon here on cbsnews.com.